Man, I appreciate it. It's cool to be here. I feel right at home in Mountain Home. Had a great dinner last night and excited to spend some time with you guys. I can tell you, David called me maybe a month ago to talk to me about this event. Before he got into any of the details, he just asked me a simple question. He said, "Hey, Aaron, do you love our country?" I thought about it for a moment. I said, "Of course, I love our country. I'm an American. This is my home. I pledge my allegiance here. I'm a citizen. I love our country." He said, "Okay, good. I just wanted to check." He says, "Do you love our flag?" And I thought it was another kind of an odd follow-up question to the first, but I remember pledging allegiance to our flag since I was a kid in school and having a great respect for our flag and our soldiers who have given up so much for that. And so, of course I love our flag. He said, "Okay, good. Last question here." He said, "I know it's bizarre, but do you love free speech?" And I'm going, "Man, of course free speech is really, it's the First Amendment. It's the cornerstone of our country." He said, "Good, because I need you to come give one." So that's why I'm here today. A little workshop here for you. But I do feel at home. My dad actually preaches in Willow Springs, which is right up the road. Grew up in Kansas. He's been out there for, I don't even know, 5 or 6 years. So really love this area and getting more familiar with this area. And so it does feel like home. I actually also grew up with Eric Dwyer. A funny coincidence that we run into each other. And we try to stay kind of further apart so that Gene doesn't have to kind of get onto us and get in trouble. So I try to keep my distance from him. As Dr. Fincher mentioned, I've been in ministry for about 11 years. I was the executive pastor at a church in Kansas City called Legacy Christian Church. Ronnie Epps started it in 1969, led by Reggie Epps, who's my father-in-law. And Reggie is still there. It's a multi-site church, healthy growing church. They run about 2,000 between 4 locations, and so they were very much reaching people for Christ in that area. So loved my time there. I tend to lean more towards business, and so as blessed as I was to minister there, now being in a role at CFR, have an opportunity to help our churches in the area of finance, really to help them continue to reach people for Christ. So I love it. And so in my role, I spend a lot of time, because we do so much with investors and we do so much with churches. We talk about finances a lot. We talk about stewardship a lot. And so that's kind of what I want to kind of take the next 30 minutes and just go through just some things that we have seen across the country, things that we've read, that I think will be a great blessing to you, because as grandparents, it's one of the themes of today, really taking time to invest in not only your children but your grandchildren, the lessons that you've learned about stewardship can make such a huge impact in their life. So I just want to kind of go through some things that I know that I've really been blessed as it's been handed down to me. And the first question you might ask is, why should we even study stewardship? Well, if you look through the Bible, there's over 500 scriptures that talk about prayer, 500 that talk about faith, but over 2,300 that talk about money or possessions. And so it is very much a subject that is discussed in the New Testament, of being a good steward. And a lot of times it even starts with the proper perspective. In Psalms 24:1, the writer says that the earth is the Lord's and all that is in it. And so as we think about the things that we have been entrusted with, it's important to understand that we don't own anything. We're not owners, we're managers. We are stewards of everything that God has given to us, which includes our possessions, which includes our grandchildren. And so it's important that we take a look at that lens today. On your handout, I'm going to talk about a tool that was impressed upon me, but I want to look at that tool through the lens of I'm the manager. And so I know many of you have this handout on your table. It's kind of the schedule for today, but if you open it up and you can look inside, there's a section there that says Workshop Aaron Bates. And what I might have you do is write the title 10-10-80 Plan at the top. And then you can kind of divide your paper up into 3 sections. 10% give, 10% save, 10% spend, or 80% spend. Okay? So you can write 10, 10, 80 at the top, and then divide it up 3 sections: 10 give, 10 save, 80 spend. And that's what we're going to kind of talk through today, about how to be a good steward, because God has entrusted us with so much, and a lot of our stewardship really revolves around our giving. It revolves around how we save, and it also revolves around how we spend. So let's talk here real quick just about giving. I was sitting with one of my elders in a meeting, and we were talking about, we were going through a stewardship series. And he made the comment that's always stuck with me, because I was talking about, I'm giving back to God. And he said, Aaron, let me stop you there. He said, we don't give anything to God. We return back to him what already belongs to him. And I remember that was actually the right perspective, since that it's already his to begin with. Now, if we just do a very quick biblical overview of tithing or giving, we see in the very beginning in Genesis that Cain and Abel demonstrated to us really what that act of worship was. God was pleased with one and not the other. Deuteronomy 26, when you finish setting aside your tithe, the word tithe means 10%. So there was this a scheduled time in the year and a scheduled percentage that God's people were to lay at the local storehouse. We know in 1 Corinthians 16:2 that Paul kind of carries over some of that proportional giving when he says that we are to give in proportion to our income. Not just the remainder, but actually think about it ahead of time as a set amount in proportion, so in relationship to our income. In 2 Corinthians 9, not only is there an amount, but there's an actual attitude or a disposition when he says that we are to determine in our heart what we want to give, and then give what? Cheerfully. So we can't be grumpy givers. God wants us to be very cheerful about it and celebrate it and lay it there at his feet. Matthew 6 talks about that we are to seek ye first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and then all these things will be added unto you. So I don't think any of us are surprised by the fact that giving and tithing and money is a subject that we find very pervasive in the New Testament. I do think I have some surprising facts for you, though. I recently looked up a study that was completed on the most recent set of IRS data related to contributions and people being charitable. And Christians were a major part of that group. And so let me give you some of the results from that study. They said that tithers make up only 10 to 25% of a congregation. So it is only about 10 to 25% of the people in our church's tithe. Now, only 5% of the U.S. tithes, with 80%, the largest majority of Americans giving less than 2% of their income to charity. Now, Christians were a little bit higher than the average. Christians give about 2.5% per capita, so not quite at that 10% level. What's interesting, though, is that during the Great Depression, our Christians per capita were giving 3.3%. So we're actually giving less than what we were during one of the hardest economic times of our country. Okay? Now, I was surprised by that when I read that study. I certainly don't want anybody in here to feel guilty, but I took it definitely to me as a challenge that it is a subject that we shouldn't be afraid to talk about, to challenge God's people to be good stewards of what he's given to us. And some of the reasons that I hear in terms of why people think we are to give, we can kind of adjust their perspective. Sometimes people think that we are supposed to give because God needs our money. Let me say it again. They think that we're to give because God needs our money. And I just want to stop here, because if the creator of the universe, who owns all of this, needs my money, we have a big problem. Okay? God doesn't need our money, folks. Sometimes people think that they're to give because the church needs our money. Well, the church does need resources to continue its ministry, but the church has existed for thousands of years and will continue to exist for thousands of years in various ways. We are certainly not to give because the church needs our money. So why are we to give? Why does God talk about giving? What should be our motivation for giving? And I think that John 3:16 makes it pretty clear why we're to give. Because God himself is a giver. God so loved the world, he gave his only Son, that whoever would believe in him would not perish but would have eternal life. God gave first. God has given us eternal life. God has given us Jesus Christ. and our motivation to return back to Him so that other people can come to that saving knowledge. What an item that we have to be a steward of. But secondly, God is also very wise in knowing that we can't serve two masters. And so think that when we give, we are constantly, in and of ourselves, demonstrating to God, but also to ourselves, that I am not going to be ruled by possessions. And I am not going to serve materials. I'm going to serve my Father. And so I want us to think about our giving from that lens. That we are a steward, we are a manager, and really to challenge us to be generous. And I might even use a different word. See, in Corinthians 9, God loves a cheerful giver. And I think it's interesting that word cheerful is actually the Greek word hilaros. Many of you have probably heard this before, but that word hilarious is where we get our English word hilarious. And so it's almost that we need to give so generously that it's laughable and that it's fun. I remember hearing Dave Ramsey talk about this. He said that one of the ways that he practiced cheerful giving was that he and his wife would intentionally go to a Waffle House on Thanksgiving night for Thanksgiving dinner. Now, waffle seems like a kind of a weird Thanksgiving dinner to me, but the reason that he did that is because when you think about the person that's working at a Waffle House on Thanksgiving night where they could have been with their family, that's the kind of person that really is stretching, that really needs to make some money. And so what he would do is intentionally go to a Waffle House, and he and his wife had decided they were going to leave a $100 bill as a tip, and then walk out before she even saw it, sit in the car, look through the window, and then just watch as the waitress pulled up and thought it was a mistake, watching her then realize, no, this was intentionally left to bless them. And they just laughed about it. They had such a great time with that. And that was especially a challenge to me. And so today, as we're talking about Christian stewardship, I want to challenge you, not only as grandparents to lead by example, but how can you impress upon your children? How can you impress upon your grandchildren to really honor God in their giving? Okay? Let's talk about another area that we have to steward, and that's in our savings, or that's maybe in how we invest God's resources. So what does the Bible say about investing? Proverbs 21:20 says, "The wise store up choice food and oil, but a fool spends all that he gets." Proverbs 30:24, "How little, but also how wise ants are to store up food in the summer." In Genesis 41, we know that Joseph was brought in as he was able to interpret Pharaoh's dream to set aside 7 years where there was plenty so that they had what they needed for the 7 years of famine. And so the Bible does have this principle of being a wise steward as it relates to our savings and our investing. So let's get very practical in here for a moment. Talk about maybe what are some practical steps. Now, maybe in some of these steps, you guys are already like, check, I got that one already done. Well, that's great. So I can tell you that when I sat down with my father-in-law, he went through these with me, and they were very impactful as a young married, no kids. I was just like, I don't know what I'm doing. And he was like, Aaron, this is what you need to do. And so think about even these practical steps through that lens. Number one is to set a goal to have $1,000 in your bank, in a savings account. That should be your first step. And why is that? Well, studies show that more than half of Americans have less than $1,000 in savings. Half of Americans, listen to this, 50% of Americans, 180 million people, can't even afford a $400 emergency without borrowing. That's staggering. And so when we have $1,000 in the bank, that means that you almost have your own credit account for yourself, that any emergency that comes up, you don't have to go borrow. You don't have to put money on a credit card. You can pay for it with the money that you saved that's for that specific purpose. Dave Ramsey talks about the moment that you have that $1,000 in the bank, you can have plastic surgery, where you cut up all your credit cards. That's what he calls it, plastic surgery. So I kind of like that idea. So then what's next? after kind of having $1,000 kind of in a savings account that's for emergencies, just very short-term emergencies. Well, the next thing that we would really advise you to do is to have anywhere between a 3 to 6 month emergency savings account built. Most of us, you guys have been around the block for a little bit. You don't really know what's going to happen in life. Money Magazine put an article out that said that over any 10-year period, over 78% of people will have some sort of major financial event that's negative in any 10-year period of time. And so because we really can't predict when that's going to happen, to be able to have those reserves set aside means that we can weather that storm. We can continue to pay our bills. We can continue to put food on the table to feed our families, and that we can continue to live without too much stress, knowing that we have some time to go out and find another source of income. And so we would encourage families to do that. Now, typically, I would say that the best place to keep that is in something that's liquid. You don't really want to have to take penalties on that if you need to access it. So I don't really like locking it up in something that's going to cost me to access it. Something that's very low risk. Certainly don't want to place it in something that's going to have large principal swings. I'm not sure I'd throw it in the stock market, okay, where you might go up and down 20 or 30%. But I'd want it liquid, and I'd want it low risk, and that's definitely one of the places in CFR that we can be a resource for people. So after you have $1,000 in the bank, 3 to 6 month emergency fund, really the third thing then is really to start thinking about retirement. And you might do the 3 to 6 month while you're also doing retirement. Now, some of you might already be in retirement, and that's great. Your kids probably aren't, and your grandkids are not as well. I know that when we sat down as a young married couple, I would not have known a single thing about what 401ks are, or IRAs, or various other things that I have come to really enjoy this field of study for me. And so I know that one of the books I read, and I would recommend this to you to have your kids read, is a book called Rich Dad, Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki. Great book, gleaned a lot of great principles from that. One of his first principles is called paying yourself first. Paying yourself first. So after you set aside 10% on a tithe, take another 10% and pay yourself first. Before you start spending any money on rent and cars and food, internet, all these various other things, pay yourself first, so that later, 30, 40, 50 years from now, you'll have a sum of money that you can live off of, and you won't be worried, and you won't have to work. You can enjoy, or you can do whatever you want to do. You can work if you want, you don't have to. And so pay yourself first. I think it's interesting, some of our young people, they think that being a millionaire is hard, and being a millionaire is not that hard. Okay, what's hard is being disciplined. But being a millionaire is not hard. I took a teacher that makes $30,000 a year. If she follows this, set aside 10% from the moment that she's 22, and then does it every month, which would be about $250 every month, puts it in her 401k, assuming that the average is kind of what historically what our stock market has averaged, she would have about $2 million from the age of 22 to 72. So it's not hard, it's just being disciplined is hard. And so depending on what age you are, here's some things that I would throw out there for you to consider as you're thinking about retirement, or your kids, or your grandkids. Is number one, just think about what are your goals? What do you need? Now, some of you are in an age where what you need is your principal to stay intact, and maybe have some fixed interest that you can have to supplement some pensions or some Social Security or various other things. But what you don't want is your principal locked up in something that's going to be taking big swings. That's where I wouldn't be able to sleep at night. So your goals might be different than maybe your kids' goals, who have a longer time horizon, and they can take a little bit more risk with their money. Even though it's diversified, they can take a little bit more risk. So what are your goals? What do you need? I can tell you at my age, one of my goals is to, whether the market is up or down, it's called dollar cost averaging. I'm not trying to time the market. That's very difficult. Every month I contribute out of my check. I am buying things, whether they're Right now the market's high. It's like, what, 23,000, just kind of set its all-time record. But certainly in 2008, it was not doing great. I don't care. I was 30. I'm buying stuff cheap right now. I have plenty of time to let this ride on. So what's important to me, my goals, is I want to have a dollar amount when I turn 65 that at a 4% interest rate can pay me in fixed income more than I am making now in my salary, which allows me then to not have to draw down on my principal at all. So that's one of my goals. And so you might think through your lens, what are your goals, what are your kids' goals, and then how can you help teach them how to be a good steward in retirement. Second is really to consider your risk level. Consider your risk level. Not all of us are the same as it comes to risk. I typically tend to be very aggressive. My grandfather, he also tends to be very aggressive, and I'm like, hey man, we need to kind of curb some of this here. We need to kind of get you out of the market and get you into something that's not going to be as risky. But he's very risky. Not all of us are made the same. I've come across some very young individuals that I have told them, you know what we have back there, certainly it would be much better for you to be in the market than with us. And they're like, no, I don't. I don't want to be in the market. That's too risky. I'd rather have something that pays me a fixed income. Okay, fine. That's great. Everybody has a different risk tolerance. Typically, our risk tolerances are tied to our age. The younger we are, the more we can afford to be risky. The more time we have. Also, consider reward. You know, a lot of times, risk and reward are tied together. So just because something looks great, typically it's going to come with a little bit more risk. And so that's what I'd encourage you guys to consider, or you to walk through with your kids. What is your goals? What's your risk? And then what's kind of the reward that's associated with that risk? And what's fun is there is no one size fits all. Very much, this is very much the fun part of my job, is trying to figure out how can we best leverage what your goals are with what is out there. Last here is really about spending. So let me wrap that up. I just say, teach your kids, teach your grandkids, and you yourself really practice how to be a good investor, a good saver. Very important. I can tell you in this area, I cover 4 states, 700 churches. I don't know how many, there's a lot of people in there. We are very conservative in this area. So I think I have experienced that we are very much good savers. Some of the information I'm going to share with you about debt throughout the rest of the country, I'm not sure always carries out to the Midwest, but typically I find that we are very conservative, great savers. So I'm probably preaching to the choir here on that. Spending. This would be the last 80. So we have now taught our kids and grandkids, and we are practicing how to be good givers. We also have practicing and taught the concept of being good savers, paying ourselves first. And then last, let's talk about the 80. So really kind of the bulk of what we have in terms of finances to steward. I think it's very interesting when we talk about spending, we also probably need to talk about debt. I saw a recent study that just came out with what the average debt carried by Americans is. Anybody want to guess on what the average debt that people have on their credit cards in America is? I think you'll be kind of surprised by this. $16,000. So think about yours, think about the average. Kind of where do you land? The average car loan is about $28,000. $28,000, car payment being about $503. I think, to me, that kind of shows that as Americans, even in our culture, we are having a hard time living below our means. And so I think as we talk about that, as we practice that in our families, is teaching us how to live below our means is really one of the easiest and most effective ways for us to be a good steward of what God's given us. So how do we do that? How do we live below our means? Well, I think a budget is one of the best ways we can practice that. It's a great tool. It's an effective tool. Dave Ramsey says that we are to act our wage. Act your wage. Sometimes people don't like the word budget. They think it's negative. They think it puts too much constraint on them. And so for them, I just say, well, then maybe you need to create a spending plan. Because it's way more fun to spend than it is to budget. But it's the same thing. So, create a budget. Now, Luke talks about this. He says, who would build a tower and not first sit down and estimate the cost to build it? And so living below our means and planning our spending are some major points that I think we can practice and teach our kids. And so let me talk about why. What is so good? What are the benefits of a budget? Well, number one, we're going to have way better communication between us and or our spouse. And we all know that there's really three major issues typically when the couples fight over. You know, it's money, sex, and communication, and in-laws. I mean, those are the three. I mean, probably the fourth one in there for me. I'm just joking. But I can tell you that as it relates to our budget, one of the things that we were told by a very wise couple and was going to build an allowance into our budget. And I thought that sounded very much like I was back as a 3-year-old. I'm like, man, I got to do chores and I'm going to get an allowance. But what was cool about it for us is that in our budget, we have some major categories. But trying to budget for haircuts and these, golf. I say golf. And, all these tiny little Starbucks purchases and Cokes. Like, I'm not trying to get in an argument with her, and I certainly don't want her to come yell at me if I buy a Starbucks or something. And so we built into our budget an allowance that you were given, a certain dollar amount every 2 weeks. It's yours. I'm not going to get on you. Once you're out of your money, though, you're out of your money. So I better not see golf on our card. It needs to come out of your allowance. And so that was really good. Like, that really did kind of cut out some of the unnecessary, I'll call them unnecessary little squabbles. Was building an allowance into our budget. The other thing that budgets have been proven time over time to do is that you will actually spend less when you budget, when you actually do budget. And a lot of times it's related to the fact that when you do a budget, quite a few people do what's called an envelope system. Raise your hand. Is the envelope system pretty new, or are most people familiar with it? So envelopes is, you have an envelope for every category. It might be groceries and gas and Christmas presents and various other things. Your dollars come in, you take the cash, you divide it up into those envelopes, and then that's it. You don't use anything else. I think Money Magazine did an article about people are they spend 12 to 18% less when they use cash as opposed to swiping. It's just harder to hand over that paper than it is to just swipe. Or now I get very confused because I'm like, is it a chip or is it a swipe? And I usually guess wrong. So cash is easier. So I'd encourage you to think about that. An envelope system has very much been a blessing to us, and we have really reaped the benefit of that budget. I read in another article as well that there was very much some wisdom related to how to divide up that budget. So keep in mind, we've already tithed 10, we've already saved 10, so how should we then allocate this 80? Well, they would say to take that 80 and don't divide it evenly, 40 and 40, but take 80 and divide it 50 and 30. And your must-haves need to be no more than 50%. And then your wants need to be no more than 30%. And this is where when I was a pastor and I would do some marriage counseling with couples, we'd have a thing on finance. And so when you put yourself in their shoes, let me just take you back to maybe what their thinking is. They don't know anything about life insurance. They don't know anything about how much house can I afford. Should I buy a house or should I rent? And if I rent, yeah, I'm making $2,000 a month, but can I live in the one that's $1,500 a month? I'm like, no. So what I love about this concept is it really helps you be able to balance the things that you have to pay for in order to live. You got to eat. You most likely have to put gas in your car to get to work. You need a place to live. So some of these young people would think, I got to have a cell phone. Well, maybe you do, but probably we've got by for thousands of years without them, but it'd be harder. So you think about all those things that you must have. If you can keep them, and it's hard. It's hard because it means you can't just go out there and get that bigger house that you maybe liked. Or that you can't just go out there and get that car that you really like, because it does kind of put some constraint on it. But what's awesome about it is that it gives you 30% to really enjoy and have an awesome quality of life. If you need to buy a new couch, you can, because you're not spending 75 to 80% on your house payment. And so I really like that. I think a budget is a great tool. I think if you are able to keep within those percentages, you find that people are very blessed because they have a great quality of life. They can go take their family on a vacation. You can just do more things when you're not forced to having to pay for certain things. Okay? That is it. I'm blessed to be here. I know in my role with CFR, I get to meet many people. A lot of times people have questions. And so I want to take 2 minutes to kind of tell you here before lunch how you can partner with us if you so choose. We are one of the extension funds that serves only our Christian churches and churches of Christ. And so like I said earlier, there's about 700 of them. There's 2 other groups that do what we do, and so there's plenty of ways that you can partner. This copy's standard this month, the Christian Standard. We're on the back, so you've probably seen us before. And what I love about our model is that we have a guy that's in ministry, that's a local guy, so that it's not just a distant, across the country company. We very much have a local presence, and so we work with churches like Mountain Home, Willow. I was up in St. Robert, Missouri. I was in Ozark, Missouri, and so there's a lot of great churches that are doing a lot of great work. And our funds work like this: we have investors that keep dollars on account with us, and we pay them a very attractive, a very great rate of return. Now, what we do with those dollars is that those are taken and those are given to churches to use for various projects. It might be to build a new worship center because they currently have no more seats where they're at. It might be to renovate one of their areas, like a children's area, so they can be more friendly or inviting to families. Sometimes it might even be refinancing a church. You know, we have some churches that carry some debt, and when we're able to take maybe the percent from 6% to 5% or 5% to 4%, we can free up a lot of dollars for that church, which now they can then take and invest in ministry. So it's an awesome ministry. We are not-for-profit. We're a 501c3. I have some folders. There's one of these that should be on every table. This is kind of our annual report. So you guys can look through that if you want. I have a copy, I think, for everybody back here. And you'll see we've been around for 37 years, since 1980. I started in Florida, serving some of our churches that needed funds to build buildings back in Florida. They just were not able to get them from a local bank. That was really one of the barriers there. And so we were able to partner and kind of have a New Testament mentality where there was not a need among us because people were investing their money in ministry and it was going back out into ministry. And so it's been a ride. I think we're right now about $385 million of total assets. So it's puts us probably in the upper 2/3 if we were compared to the size of our banks here in the U.S. Now we are not a bank. And so one of the things that you can see in that report is really the number of accounts that we are managing and really their interest rates are very attractive. So let me walk through that here with you real quick. I think each of you might have had a little slip there in front of you. These are various products. And so when we talk about fixing in an interest rate, maybe to supplement Social Security, if you have money that's tax deferred right now, maybe it's in an old 401k, or it's in an old IRA, you can invest those with us, and you can pick whether it's tied to a 3 or 5 or 7 year certificate. So we, in terms of investments, it could be tax deferred, but you can also have dollars that are on the other side of that tax umbrella invested with us as well. So you can see there just the various rates. You can compare them to whatever you might find in a secular institution. And I think you'll find that we are very, very competitive and very attractive. One of the differences here in terms of this product is what's called Ready Cash. And I have found that most people, whether 3 or 5 or 7 year certificates are a good fit, most people really like this. Ready Cash, there's no penalties on that, so you very much can keep this like a liquid account. It's online. It's either online or you can call an investment rep if you want to transact with it. But let's say you have $10,000 that's just sitting in your local bank account. Well, you would treat this Ready Cash account very much like that kind of liquid account. I think the minimum is $2,000, and so you can see the rate on that's 2%, all the way up to 2.5%. But most banks, and I haven't kept a spreadsheet here at Mount Home, but I have a spreadsheet in Kansas City of about 50 of the local banks. And they're paying right now on liquid money anywhere between 5 basis points, so that'd be 0.05%. And we're paying 200 basis points, so about 20 times more interest here on your liquid reserves. And I think obviously it needs to make sense, so there's a financial part that's a blessing to you, and that's one part of the win. But what I really love about it is that I know that every dollar that's invested with us goes towards building the kingdom, building Christian churches and churches of Christ to reach people. And so I'm going to leave you with our vision. It's really to fund ministry and change lives. And we'd encourage you to be a partner with us. If you got questions, I'll be here back at my little booth back there for lunch, and would love to talk with you.